Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Death by Disney podcast. I'm your host, Adam, and today I'm talking about The Vanishing Prairie from 1954. I'm on a mission to watch all Disney films from the beginning of the company until the end. So this is kind of like in the third decade. Wow, that's crazy, actually. This is Although it did start in the late 30s, but this is about 10, 15 years after Snow White. So Disney around this time had a series of documentaries called True Life Adventures. Some were feature films and some were shorts. And they all have this kind of very unique style, which was, I think that Disney wanted to be taken seriously um, as a he wanted his movies not just to be entertaining and his company not just to have a reputation for being entertaining. He also wanted it to have a reputation for being educational. Because even back then, like, I mean, this is a normal thing for parents of any age, in any age or era, is that you want your kids to have something that entertains them but also educates them. So these films were kind of made in that sort of way. But there was um, a lot of opportunity to manipulate reality and to abuse animals, frankly. This one is not the worst for that. I think that there are worse movies from this series if we talk about animal abuse. Perry being one of them about a squirrel where they actually probably lit an area of the forest on fire and then put a wild cat, um, like a bobcat, in the water and then put the squirrel on the bobcat. So how do I know that this actually happened? That there were a lot of manipulations of the subjects, let's say, putting it diplomatically. In the trivia for this on IMBD, there's this conversation that Walt has with his nephew Roy. And in the film, there's a duck that lands in the water and it lands on frozen, well, it thinks it's water, but the pond is frozen. So it tries to land and then it slides. And Disney says something like, Walt Disney, not Roy Disney. Walt Disney says to his nephew Roy, "Where's the footage of the duck, you know, running into other ducks?" And Roy was like, "Oh, I don't know. I'll look for it." So he spends like a couple of weeks, and this is when you had to like literally look through the film to try and find something. So he's looking through frame by frame by frame by frame, can't find anything, and he thinks his uncle must be mistaken. So he says, well, there's another meeting, and Walt says the same thing. "Roy, where's the footage of the ducks?" And then Roy realizes what Walt is saying is go and make that footage happen. So I, and they did. They filmed a scene where they threw a duck into another other ducks on an ice covered pond, and they added like a bowling ball hitting some pins sound effect. So obviously they were doing that with other films in the series, and it's not a movie, but it was a short, and I forget what the short was called, but basically Walt Disney, the company, I don't know how much involvement the actual man had in it, but there's a scene of and the documentary is set in the Arctic, and these lemmings they were thrown off a cliff, and the movie suggested that this was a natural sort of phenomenon, that it was migration, but one, lemmings don't jump off of cliffs. That's not something that naturally happens. Animals, like we have never, maybe it happens, but we've never seen an animal commit suicide because most animals don't have a conception of self. So you have to have a conception of self, and it's a complicated process. But anyway, the lemmings didn't commit suicide, right? And for years, people thought that that's what happened because of Walt Disney, right? So it shows you that because he was making docutainment, right? He was making something to entertain people, and the entertainment was more important than the education. But people until the 1980s thought that that was true about the lemmings. So I think that it's not the worst thing Disney did, except if we talk about the times where it veered into animal abuse. Then it was pretty bad. Like, it was bad. But I think that, I have complicated feelings about Disney, because I think on the one hand, him and his company created great art. Things like Pinocchio, things like Cinderella, things like Lady and the Tramp. But on the other hand, they created a lot of. So, on the other hand, Walt Disney he was an artist, yes, but he was primarily a businessman who was interested in his own self-aggrandizement. How do you say that word? Anyway, he was interested in promoting himself. And to the extent that often, movies are a very collective endeavor, and often people wouldn't get credit for things that they came up with. So I think that there's that, and then I think the other parts of Disney that are not great are the fact that he and his company were really of their time, right? So that's how you did nature documentaries back then, unfortunately. And it's an interesting question now, how they do it. You know, how much interference are they actually making in the lives of their subjects? Because I think that's actually a problem still, because you know it's very rare to just stumble upon the scene that you want to show, you know. And the other part connected to that is all of this stuff that is reflective of the time period he lived in and the company began in. So, Song of the South, even though, I mean, I haven't done the video for the movie yet, but I watched the movie and I actually liked the movie, but it's so very problematic. And the reason is not necessarily because of Disney himself, it's because of the society that he lived in. And then you have things like The Great Locomotive Chase, which I just did a review of yesterday, where slavery is not mentioned, even though the main point of the plot is that some Northerners are stealing some train during the Civil War to destroy the South's train tracks. So, and there are slaves that are seen in the movie, but slavery itself is not mentioned or commented upon, and that's because segregation was still a thing in the 50s when the movie was made and being promoted in the South. Like, going back to Song of the South, the actor who played, uh, so the movie premiered in Atlanta, and the actor who played Remus was really, really revered, and he thought that this was his big break. But the movie theater where in Atlanta where the movie premiered was segregated, so he couldn't watch the movie that he was in. He couldn't watch the premiere, and Disney didn't care. So you could say that I don't. I think, like, the thing about Disney is that he was first and foremost a businessman, and he didn't really care about other aspects of that. And you know, I think it's like people say, well, he wasn't woke, and Disney now is woke or whatever. If being quotation marks woke made money, Disney would be interested in doing that. If it didn't make money, he wouldn't be interested in doing it. So that doesn't speak to me of somebody who has like really strong principles, you know. And not that you need to have strong principles to be an artist or to be a businessman, definitely not. It's just that he was a very complicated man, and his the production of his company is very complicated. It's not all bad and it's not all good. And the bad stuff is interesting to think about because of what it says about the history of cinema and also, our history as well. So I kind of was riffing there a little bit. Um, so, yeah, I think in terms of where the Vanishing Prairie stands in terms of these nature documentaries from the True Life series, where would it rank? It wasn't my favorite. There are some strange things in other movies. Like there's I'm not sure if it's in the African Lion or something, but there are some scorpions that have a hoedown, which is kind of ridiculous. And the narrator in the African Lion makes a bunch of moralistic judgments on the lion, like he's lazy, he doesn't know what he's doing, and he should work harder. So it's kind of funny. This one is just kind of boring. And Perry uh, is just interesting because of the uh, extreme cruelty that the animals were put in. I mean, I don't think, like, if you could not make the movie, don't make the movie. But it's interesting just to see, like, did they really think that we would believe that a squirrel would jump on top of a mountain lion to escape a forest fire? Maybe it would. I don't know. Like, I think the forest fire was deliberately set, right? So, yeah. Um, and so the fleeing animals were deliberate as well. So maybe it's happened in the history of the world that a squirrel has jumped on a large predator to escape a forest fire. But the odds that a camera crew would be there at that moment are very, very slight. So this one doesn't have anything interesting to recommend it. I think the only reason you would watch this movie is if you have a podcast where you are reviewing all Disney films. If you're not like me and you don't have a podcast where you're reviewing all Disney films, I don't think you need to watch it. I gave it a 5 out of 10, but I mean, that's just because there isn't any rampant examples of cruelty towards animals. That's why it's 5 and not like 1 or 2. But it's not that interesting. So I wouldn't recommend it. But I would recommend you can check out some other episodes that I have connected to the Disney Death by Disney podcast. Uh, I mentioned some good films in my little monologue earlier. The Lady and the Tramp, great film. The Cinderella, great film. Pinocchio, great film. Yeah, so that's the great thing about Disney. There's lots of things that you can find that are good to watch, that you like personally. All right, so yeah, leave a comment. Like, what do you think about it? Like, what do you think is the. Here's a question for the comments. What do you think is the worst thing the Disney company has done? And what do you think is the best thing the Disney company has done? You can choose something like morally bad, or you can just choose something connected to quality bad. And the same thing, you can choose something that's morally good, or you can choose something that's just really good quality. All right. Thank you. Bye bye.